talking to you. Purdue OWL produced the sample paper for their Purdue OWL MLA page. The sample paper that we're going to be taking a look at today, that is written in MLA format, is called Toward a Recovery of 19th Century Farming Handbooks. So we're going to be taking a look at different spots of the sample paper just so that you get accustomed to MLA format. First, we're going to take a look at the first page. On the left-hand side of the page, up at the top, you'll notice the person's name. So they chose instead to use their initials, E.L. and Angeli, which is their last name. Then the next line is Patricia Sullivan. The English 624, then 12 February 2012. So, for example, let's say I was writing a paper today. I would write down Amanda Beaulieu-Smith and pretend for a moment my professor is Daniel Scott. So Professor Daniel Scott would be the second line. Let's say that it's English 101. And then if I was writing the paper today, it would be 21 March 2020. Up at the top, you'll notice that the person that wrote this paper has their last name and the page number. You'll probably notice by now that there are blue and green text boxes. So in the green text boxes, you'll see that it has explanations for MLA style guidelines. The blue boxes contain directions for writing and citing an MLA style. So remember, MLA is not just about how I format the page and check my margins. It's also about how I cite sources and back up my information. How do I show people who wrote what in this paper? The basic format for MLA format style papers is Times New Roman 12-point font with 1-inch margins and double spaced. Your name, the professor, the class, and the date are left aligned. The title is centered, and the rest of the paragraphs usually have an indent in front of them. Let's take a look at this first paragraph together. You might have noticed there's no quotes or citations in that first paragraph. That's usually because our introduction is just a way to tell the reader what we're going to be talking about. So a lot of our supporting details, they're not really going to be in that first paragraph. We just want the reader to know what we're talking about first. So while researching texts written about 19th century farming, I found a few authors who published books about the literature of 19th century farming, particularly agricultural journals, newspapers, pamphlets, and brochures. These authors often placed the farming literature they were studying into a historical context by discussing the important events in agriculture of the year in which the literature was published. In parentheses, see Damari, for example. However, while these authors discussed journals, newspapers, pamphlets, and brochures, I could not find much discussion about another important source of farming knowledge, farming handbooks. My goal in this paper is to bring this source into the agricultural literature discussion by connecting 3 agricultural handbooks from the 19th century with 19th century agricultural literature. So this introduction does a number of different things. 1, it tells us the topic. The topic is going to be farming handbooks. It also tells us what the purpose of the paper is going to be. That last sentence, my goal in this paper is to bring this source into the agricultural literature discussion by discussing 3 agricultural handbooks from the 19th century with 19th century agricultural history. We know by that last sentence what the paper is going to be about. That is Angeli's thesis. Just to quote from the green text box at the right-hand side of the page, this thesis statement is often, but not always, the last sentence of the introduction. The thesis is a clear position that you will support and develop throughout your paper. This sentence guides your paper. Another reason why we have it is so that our reader knows what we're going to be talking about. You might have noticed that the writer of the paper is using I as a personal pronoun. So some teachers might have told you that, no, you can't talk about yourself in a paper. But it depends on what type of paper you have written. If it is a research paper about your process researching about a topic, then maybe you can use I. In the case of the argumentative research paper, you probably won't be using I very often. But again, it depends on what you're doing. Let's take a look at the bottom of page 2 and the top of page 3. We've started noticing that there are citations here. So I'm going to start reading the paragraph that starts on the bottom of page 2. One of these improvements was the development of canals and steamboats, which allowed farmers to, quote, sell what has previously been unsellable, end quote, and resulted in a, quote, substantial increase in brackets, a farmer's, end bracket, ability to earn income, end quote, parenthesis, Don Hoff 5, parenthesis, period. So what does this all mean? So basically, what you see in quotes, so it looks like a double apostrophe, that's not being said by Angeli. That is being said by who? Take a moment to look. Dan Hoff. Well, who's Dan Hoff? It says Dan Hoff 5 in parentheses. Wait, who's Dan Hoff 5? If I go all the way to the back of the paper, you're going to notice on the works cited page who Dan Hoff is. Clarence H. Dan Hoff, and the book. So we know that it's a book because it's in italics. Remember the slanted script? Change in Agriculture, the Northern United States, 1820 to 1870. That's the whole name of the book right there. Harvard UP, that's the publisher. And then 1969. So this book was written in 1969. When we are citing things, we don't just write who wrote what we found in the back of the paper. We need to also cite it in the paper itself. Why? Well, look how many different sources this person used. If we have, let's say, 10, 15, or in David Acher's case, over 100 different sources, we're going to be lost. We don't know where this information is coming from. This person is writing about several handbooks. They need to tell us what handbook they're talking about in the paper itself. Let's continue to look at page 3. So on page 3, we have several citations in that first paragraph. That first paragraph, of course, begins on the bottom of page 2. So we have Dan Hoff 5, Dan Hoff 7, Hurt 127, then 128, 128, 172. So what does this all mean? So in this one paragraph, we actually have more than one source that we're citing. You don't arrange your paper by source. You arrange your paper by the major supporting details. So going back to Dan Hoff 5, that's not his name. If we look at that 5, that refers to the page number that the person is actually citing from. Dan Hoff 7, that means that the work that we're looking at was written by Dan Hoff and page 7. But then all of a sudden, in that one paragraph, we're looking at Hurt 127. We have a new writer we're looking at, a new source. So we have to put in parentheses the writer's last name and then the page number that we're referring to. When you look at parenthesis 128 and parenthesis, in that same paragraph, that citation right beforehand, that quote, became a business rather than a way of life. That specific quote is from page 128 of the source that was written by the person whose last name is Hurt. If we look at the next quote, less attention to production of surplus commodities like wheat, tobacco, pork, and beef. 128, That's still a quote from Hertz's book, but on page 128. If we go to that last line, 172, we actually don't have a quote right there. But that information in that sentence actually comes from page 172 of Hertz's book. And we still need to say where it comes from, even though we don't have quotation marks around it. I want to bring your attention to the works cited page at the end of the document. The works cited page is where you need to list all of your sources. In this case, this is where Angeli listed all of their sources as well. You'll notice they're all in alphabetical order according to the writer's last name or the title. So if you look at the works cited page where it says History Census Browser, there's no writer for that one. So the writer might have been anonymous, or maybe there were several writers that worked on that. But either way, a writer is not attributed to that. So it's Historical Census Browser. And this was actually from a website. So you can actually see around Historical Census Browser, there's quotes around it. So this was not a book because it's not in italics. So you can tell that this was from a website. And the name of the website actually is University of Virginia Library, because that's in italics. When you are referring to a web page in your works cited page, website names are always put in italics. And we also have the URL right there, the way to actually access it. We also have the access date, access 6 December 2008. I encourage you to keep looking at the sample paper. I'm not going to be showing every single part of this or talking about every single part of this, but this is something to definitely take a look at. This again is the sample paper from Purdue OWL, which is available on e-learning under additional readings. You can also view the Purdue OWL sample paper at Purdue OWL. And I'm going to provide a link for you to access the website. Highly encourage that you explore this website. You're not going to remember all the rules off the top of your head. I don't remember all the rules off the top of my head sometimes. So this is actually a great source to use. They always update this website. APA format style is also on this website. Again, highly encourage you to go and explore this website. I will provide links in the YouTube video description.